Caleb Cross sat in the dirt with infection burning through his leg and a loaded pistol resting against his thigh. He'd survived battlefields that swallowed better men whole, but a simple wound festering in the high desert was going to finish what war couldn't. The sun bled red across the horizon, and he figured he had maybe one more sunrise left in him, if that. Then a barefoot girl appeared from nowhere, 8 years old with tangled hair and eyes too knowing for her age. She studied him without fear and said, "You look like you're about to do something foolish." Before we continue, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will restore your faith in second chances. The girl stood there in the fading light, dusty feet planted wide, waiting for an answer Caleb didn't have. His hand had been inching toward the pistol before she appeared, and now the weight of that intention settled heavy in his chest. She couldn't have been more than 8, maybe 9 years old, all sharp angles and wild hair the color of summer wheat. Her dress was patched at the knees and hem, faded from too many washings, but clean. That detail struck him, clean, in a place where dust claimed everything. "I asked you a question, mister." Her voice carried the peculiar confidence of children raised in isolation, the ones who learn to read adults the way most kids read picture books. Caleb's throat worked, dry as the cracked earth beneath him. "What makes you think I'm about to do something foolish?" "You got that look?" She tilted her head, studying him with unsettling directness, like you're trying to decide if the world's worth sticking around for. The accuracy of that observation landed like a physical blow. Caleb looked away, toward the abandoned trading post 50 yards distant. The settlement, if you could call 3 buildings and a dried-up well a settlement, had been dying for years. Now it was just a corpse baking in the sun, populated only by lizards and his own failing body. "You should go home," he said finally, "before it gets dark." "That's where I'm going." She crossed her arms. "Question is, are you coming with me?" "I don't think that's... Mama's real good with wounds." The girl's gaze dropped to his leg, where infection had turned the skin around an arrow wound angry shades of red and purple. Caleb had wrapped it days ago with strips torn from his shirt, but the fever burning through him told the story those bandages couldn't hide. "She saved a man once who got snake bit so bad his whole arm turned black. Saved him even though he was mean as hell and didn't deserve saving." Caleb almost smiled at that. "What happened to him?" "He got better, then he left. Didn't even say thank you." She shrugged. "Mama said some people don't know how to accept kindness. Said it makes them feel small." The words hit closer to home than the girl could know. Caleb had spent 3 years after his discharge from the cavalry running from exactly that. Kindness, community, anything that required him to be more than a shadow passing through. Men like him didn't deserve saving. They deserved exactly what they got. "I appreciate the offer," he said carefully, "but I'll manage." "You'll be dead by morning." Matter of fact, like she was commenting on the weather. "I seen plenty of men die out here. You got maybe 6 hours the way that fever's got you shaking." Caleb realized she was right. Tremors ran through his hands, and his vision had started going soft at the edges. He'd been a soldier long enough to recognize the signs. Infection this deep, this hot, didn't give second chances. "Why do you care?" The question came out harsher than he intended. "You don't know me." The girl considered that, her young face serious. "No, I don't. But Mama says every person who crosses our path is crossing it for a reason. Says we don't get to choose who needs help. We just get to choose whether we give it." "Your mama sounds like a wise woman." "She is." Pride lit those sharp eyes. "She's also stubborn as a winter mule and twice as ornery. If I tell her I left a dying man out here, she'll tan my hide, then come drag you back herself. So you can save us all some trouble and just say yes." Despite everything, the pain, the fever, the crushing weight of not wanting to exist anymore, Caleb found himself curious. Who was this child, appearing like a mirage with her bare feet and old soul wisdom? Who was the mother who taught her to see worth in strangers? "What's your name?" he asked. "Willow Bennett." She stuck out a dirt-smudged hand. "What's yours?" "Caleb Cross." Her hand was small and calloused in his, the grip surprisingly strong. When she smiled, something cracked open in Caleb's chest, something he'd thought long dead. Well, Mr. Cross, you ready to meet my mama? He should say no. He should send this child home and finish what he'd started before she appeared. But Caleb found himself nodding, found himself saying the word that would change everything. Yes. Good. Willow released his hand and surveyed him critically. Can you stand? I can try. Standing proved harder than anticipated. The world tilted sideways and Caleb's leg threatened to buckle. Willow wedged herself under his arm. She barely reached his ribs and steadied him with surprising strength. Lean on me, she commanded. It's not far, just over that ridge. Just over that ridge turned out to be a generous estimate. Every step sent fresh agony through Caleb's infected leg, and the fever made distance meaningless. They could have walked 20 yards or 20 miles. It all blurred together in waves of heat and pain. Willow kept up a steady stream of chatter, her voice a lifeline in the gathering dark. We got chickens, she said. 12 of them, though the coyotes keep trying to make it less. Got a milk cow named Buttercup, but don't let the name fool you. She's mean as sin. Kicked Mama in the shin last week hard enough to leave a bruise big as your fist. Caleb grunted, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. We grow most of our own food. Potatoes, beans, squash, some corn when the rain comes right. Mama's teaching me to read from the books we got. I can do all of McGuffey's first reader now, and I'm starting on the second. The pride in her voice made Caleb's throat tight. This child, living in the middle of nowhere, learning to read while he'd spent years trying to forget everything he'd ever known. That's good, he managed. Reading's important. That's what Mama says. Willow adjusted her grip as they navigated a rocky section. She says the world's changing fast and women got to be ready to change with it. Says I'm not going to spend my life scraping by like... She stopped abruptly. Like what? Caleb prompted when she didn't continue. Nothing. But her voice had gone tight. We're almost there. See that light? Through the haze of fever, Caleb made out a warm glow cresting the ridge ahead. Not the dying settlement behind them, but something alive. Something that suggested people still fought against the wilderness instead of surrendering to it. They crested the ridge, and Caleb got his first look at the Bennett homestead. It sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst winds by surrounding hills. The house itself was small, maybe 2 rooms, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney at one end. But even in the twilight, Caleb could see signs of care. A vegetable garden bordered by river stones, a chicken coop with a mended roof, fence posts that stood straight and strong. A barn listed slightly to one side, but someone had shored it up with new timber. The whole place spoke of stubborn survival, of someone refusing to let the frontier grind them down. Mama! Willow's shout split the evening quiet. Mama, I brought someone. The door opened, spilling lamplight across the packed earth yard. A woman stepped out, and even through his fever-addled vision, Caleb could see her stiffen. Willow Grace Bennett. Her voice carried the kind of controlled fury that made seasoned soldiers straighten up. What have you done? He needs help, Mama. He's hurt bad. The woman descended the 2 steps from the porch, and Caleb got his first clear look at Mara Bennett. She stood maybe 5.5 feet tall, built lean and hard from frontier life. Her hair, dark as creek water at midnight, was pulled back in a no-nonsense braid. She wore a simple work dress, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. But it was her face that stopped him, beautiful in that severe way of women who'd forgotten how to expect gentleness from the world. High cheekbones, full mouth set in a grim line, and eyes the color of winter storms. Those eyes swept over Caleb with clinical assessment, missing nothing. He's cavalry, she said flatly. Was, Caleb corrected, his voice barely above a whisper. Discharged 3 years back. Once cavalry, always cavalry. Mara crossed her arms. And I don't help cavalry. Mama, take him to the barn, Willow. Give him water and bandages. In the morning, he leaves. He won't make it to morning. Willow's voice cracked with frustration. Look at him, Mama. He's burning up. Not my problem. Caleb had faced enemy fire without flinching, had seen men die screaming, had done things in service to his country that still visited him in nightmares. But the cold dismissal in Mara Bennett's eyes hit harder than any of that. I understand, he said quietly. Willow, I appreciate your kindness, But your mom should go. You can't even stand without help. Willow's grip on him tightened. Mama, please. You're always saying how we got to be better than what hurts us, how holding on to hate just poisons our own well. Something flickered across Mara's face, pain maybe, or recognition. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and Caleb saw the internal battle playing out. You don't know what you're asking, Mara said finally, her voice softer now. You don't know what men like him. I know he's dying. Willow's chin came up, stubborn. And I know you can save him. So the question isn't what he deserves, Mama. The question is who we are. The silence stretched out, broken only by the chirping of crickets and Caleb's labored breathing. Mara stood there, torn between whatever history haunted her and the pleading in her daughter's eyes. Finally, she exhaled, a long, defeated sound. Bring him inside. She turned away sharply. But he stays in the spare room, and he's gone the minute he can walk. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Willow nearly sagged with relief. Thank you, Mama. Mara didn't respond, just disappeared back into the house. Willow urged Caleb forward, and they made their slow, painful way across the yard. The interior of the house was sparse but clean. A main room served as kitchen and living space, dominated by a cast-iron stove and a scarred wooden table. Shelves lined one wall, holding preserves and dry goods. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace, and Caleb caught sight of books. A small stack, precious as gold out here. Through there, Willow said, indicating a doorway to the left. The spare room was barely large enough for the narrow bed it contained. A single window looked out toward the barn, and a battered dresser stood against one wall. Caleb sank onto the bed with a groan, and the world immediately started spinning. Mara appeared with a basin of water and clean cloth. She set them on the dresser without looking at Caleb, her movements efficient and cold. Willow, get me the whiskey from the high shelf, and my sewing kit. Yes, Mama. When the girl had gone, Mara finally turned to Caleb. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but he caught the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept distance between them. I'm going to clean that wound, she said. It's going to hurt like hell, and if you're smart, you'll bite down on something. But you make one wrong move, soldier, and I'll open your throat and tell the sheriff you attacked me. We clear? Crystal. Good. She moved to the foot of the bed. Get those pants off. Caleb fumbled with his belt, his hands shaking from fever and exhaustion. Mara waited, impassive, until he'd managed to work the blood-stained trousers down. The wound on his thigh looked even worse exposed to lamplight. Angry, weeping, surrounded by inflammation that spoke of deep infection. Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't comment. When Willow returned with the whiskey and sewing kit, Mara took them without a word. This is going to hurt, she said again, and poured whiskey directly into the wound. Caleb had been shot twice, stabbed once, and broken more bones than he could count. None of it compared to the white-hot agony of alcohol searing infected flesh. He arched off the bed, a strangled sound escaping his clenched teeth. Hold still, Mara commanded. Her hands worked with brutal efficiency, cleaning the wound, draining the worst of the infection. When she reached for the needle and thread, Caleb's vision grayed at the edges. Willow, hold the lamp closer. The girl obeyed, her young face pale but determined. Caleb watched through waves of pain as Mara stitched the wound closed, her movements precise and sure. She'd done this before, maybe many times. There. She tied off the last stitch and sat back. That's all I can do. The rest is up to him and whatever luck he's got left. He's strong, Mama. He'll make it. Mara's expression softened slightly when she looked at her daughter. We'll see. Now get to bed. It's late, and tomorrow's chores won't wait. Can I say goodnight to him first? For a moment, Caleb thought Mara would refuse, but she nodded once, sharp, and left the room. Willow moved closer to the bed, her small hand finding Caleb's. You're going to be okay, she said with the absolute conviction of childhood. I know you are. Why are you so sure? Caleb's voice came out rough, barely audible. Because you said yes. She squeezed his hand. When I asked if you wanted to meet Mama, you could have said no, but you didn't. That means you're not ready to give up. Not really. You're just tired. Out of the mouths of babes. Caleb wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he'd given up long before she found him, but the words wouldn't come. Get some rest, Mr. Cross. Willow released his hand and stepped back. Tomorrow you'll feel better, and maybe Mama will smile. She doesn't do that much anymore, but when she does, it's like sunshine. She slipped from the room, leaving Caleb alone with his pain and the weight of kindness he didn't deserve. Through the thin walls, he could hear the murmur of voices, Mara and Willow, discussing the day. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was gentle, loving. A mother and daughter finding peace in their small corner of a hard world. Caleb closed his eyes and let the fever take him under, dimly aware that he'd just made the first choice in 3 years that wasn't about running away. The next days passed in a blur of fever dreams and pain. Caleb surfaced occasionally to find Mara changing his bandages, her touch impersonal but competent. Sometimes Willow sat beside the bed, reading aloud from her McGuffey's reader, with careful concentration. Sometimes he heard nothing but the wind rattling the window glass and the creak of the house settling. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Caleb woke with his head clear for the first time in what felt like months. Weak as a kitten, but clear. Morning light slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. From somewhere outside came the sound of someone chopping wood. Steady, rhythmic strikes. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His leg throbbed, and his muscles felt like overcooked noodles. But the sick heat of infection had passed, leaving behind only the clean pain of healing. The door opened and Mara entered with a tray. She stopped short when she saw him awake and upright. "You should be lying down." "I've been lying down for days, seems like." 4 days. She set the tray on the dresser. "You were more dead than alive when Willow dragged you here. I wasn't sure you'd pull through." "Sorry to disappoint you." The barb landed. Mara's eyes flashed, but she kept her voice level. "I brought broth and bread. You need to eat." "Thank you." She helped him sit up properly, propping him with the thin pillow. The movement brought them close enough that Caleb could smell her, soap and wood smoke and something green, like sage. She pulled back quickly, maintaining that careful distance. "How's your leg feel?" "Like someone used it for knife practice. But better than it was." Mara unwrapped the bandage with practiced efficiency, examining her handiwork. The wound had started to close, the angry redness fading to pink. She nodded once, satisfied, and wrapped it fresh. "You'll have a scar," she said, "but you'll keep the leg." "I've got plenty of scars already. One more won't make much difference." Something in his tone made Mara pause. She studied him for a long moment, those winter storm eyes seeing more than Caleb was comfortable with. "What happened to you?" she asked finally. "And I don't mean the wound, I mean before. What broke you so bad that my daughter found you ready to die in the dirt?" The question was too direct to dodge. Caleb looked away, toward the window and the mountains beyond. "I spent 3 years in the cavalry," he said slowly. "Did things in service to my country that needed doing. At least, that's what they told us. We cleared territories, protected settlements, dealt with threats." "Dealt with threats." Mara's voice had gone flat again. "That what you call it?" "I'm not proud of what I did, but I did it. I survived when better men didn't. And after my discharge, I couldn't figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with that." "So you decided to finish the job yourself?" "More or less." Mara turned away, her spine rigid. When she spoke again, her voice shook with barely controlled fury. "My husband died because of men like you. Men who followed orders without question, who cleared territories and dealt with threats without caring who got caught in the middle. Daniel was trading peacefully, doing everything right, and he still ended up dead because some lieutenant decided the area needed securing." The words hit like physical blows. Caleb had suspected Mara's hatred of the cavalry ran deep, but hearing the specifics made it real, made it personal. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know that doesn't change anything, but I am sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring him back." Mara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Sorry doesn't give my daughter her father. Sorry doesn't undo 4 years of scratching out a living alone, of wondering if I'm raising her right, of lying awake at night listening for raiders because there's no one else to keep watch. You're right, it doesn't." She whirled on him then, eyes blazing. "Then why should I let you stay here? Why should I waste my medicine, my time, my food, on someone who represents everything that destroyed my life?" Caleb met her gaze steadily. and as soon as I can walk, I'll be gone. I won't burden you any longer than necessary." "Good." But Mara's voice had lost some of its heat. She looked exhausted suddenly, the anger draining away to leave only weariness. "Eat your breakfast, and when you're done, rest. The sooner you're healed, the sooner you can leave." She left before Caleb could respond. He stared at the cooling broth, appetite gone, but forced himself to eat anyway. Mara was right. The sooner he recovered, the sooner he could stop being a reminder of her pain. Willow appeared in the doorway as he finished, her face anxious. "I heard Mama yelling. You okay?" "I'm fine, little bit. Just, your mama's got good reason to be angry." "Oh, she's not angry at you, not really." Willow came closer, perching on the edge of the bed. "She's angry at what happened, at losing Papa, at having to be strong all the time. But she's not mean, Mr. Cross. She's just hurt." "I know." "Do you?" Those knowing eyes studied him. "Because you look hurt too. Different hurt maybe, but still hurt." How did this child see so clearly? Caleb found himself nodding, unable to lie to her. "Yeah," he admitted. "I'm hurt too." "Then maybe you and Mama got something in common after all." Willow smiled, tentative and hopeful. "Maybe that's why I found you." "Maybe. I gotta go help with chores, but I'll check on you later, okay? And tomorrow, if you're feeling better, maybe you can sit outside for a bit. Fresh air's good for healing." She left in a whirl of energy, and Caleb was alone again with his thoughts. The days began to blur together in a new way, not from fever, but from routine. Caleb's strength returned slowly. By the second week, he could walk from the bedroom to the main room and back without his leg giving out. Mara allowed him to sit outside on the porch steps, where he watched Willow feed chickens and Mara work in the garden. They didn't speak much. Mara made her disapproval clear through silence and distance. But Caleb noticed things, the way she checked his bandages every morning without fail, how she made sure his meals were substantial enough to rebuild his strength, the fact that she always left books nearby in case he wanted to read. Small kindnesses, delivered without warmth, but with consistency. 3 weeks after his arrival, Caleb woke to find himself alone in the house. Through the window, he could see Mara struggling with a section of fence that had fallen during a windstorm. Willow helped where she could, but the posts were too heavy for her, and Mara kept stopping to rest. Caleb dressed carefully, testing his leg. It held. He limped outside into the bright morning sun. "I can help with that," he called. Mara looked up, surprise flickering across her face before the usual guardedness returned. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for weeks, and I still owe you for saving my life." He gestured to the fallen fence. "Let me earn my keep." He expected her to refuse, but Mara surprised him. "Fine. Hold this post steady while I shore up the base." They worked in silence, finding a rhythm. Caleb held while Mara hammered, then traded places to dig out rocks while she positioned the next post. Willow fetched tools and water, chattering happily about nothing and everything. By midday, they'd repaired 20 feet of fence. Caleb's leg ached fiercely, and sweat soaked his shirt, but satisfaction settled in his chest. The first he'd felt in years. "That's enough for today," Mara said, surveying their work. "We'll finish the rest tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am." She glanced at him, something shifting in her expression. "You know how to work. I'll give you that." It wasn't praise exactly, but it wasn't contempt either. Progress. Over the following weeks, a tentative pattern emerged. Caleb worked where he could, mending the barn roof, hauling water from the creek, chopping wood for winter. Mara maintained her distance, but the sharp edges of her hostility began to dull. They talked more, brief conversations about practical matters that sometimes strayed into deeper territory. "Why'd you enlist?" Mara asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. Willow was inside, already asleep. Caleb considered lying, then decided against it. "Didn't have much choice. Farm failed, parents died of fever, and I had a younger brother to feed. Army paid steady wages." "What happened to your brother?" "Died at Shiloh. 17 years old, shot through the chest in his first real battle." Caleb's voice stayed flat, but the old grief pressed against his ribs. "I promised my mother I'd keep him safe. Instead, I got him killed." Mara was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't pull the trigger." "I might as well have. I convinced him to enlist with me. Said we'd watch each other's backs. Caleb laughed, bitter. Some job I did. Grief makes liars of us all, Mara said softly. Makes us twist the truth until we're the villain in every story. I know, because I do it too. Caleb turned to look at her, surprised by the admission. In the twilight, Mara's face had lost some of its hardness, revealing the vulnerable woman beneath. I tell myself Daniel's death was my fault, she continued, that if I'd convinced him to stay home that day, he'd still be alive. Never mind that he was a grown man making his own choices. Never mind that he was trying to provide for his family. I rewrite history, so I'm to blame because it's easier than accepting I had no control. That's different. You didn't... Isn't it the same? Mara's eyes met his. You think you should have saved your brother. I think I should have saved my husband. We both carry guilt for deaths that weren't ours to prevent. The only difference is the uniform. The insight landed hard. Caleb had never thought of it that way. His grief and Mara's, born from the same source even if they manifested differently. I don't know if I can let it go, he said finally. The guilt. It's been my companion for so long, I wouldn't know who I am without it. Maybe that's not the right question. Mara stood, brushing dust from her skirt. Maybe instead of asking who you'd be without the guilt, you should ask who you could become despite it. She left him with that, disappearing inside to check on Willow. Caleb sat in the gathering dark, turning her words over in his mind like smooth stones. The next morning, he woke to find Mara already in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with fierce concentration. She looked up when he entered, flour dusting her cheek. There's coffee on the stove, she said, and I need your help with something today. Name it. The barn's listing worse. I've shorted up 3 times, but the foundation's shifting. I need someone with actual carpentry skills to look at it before the whole thing comes down. I'm no carpenter, but I'll do what I can. They spent the day working on the barn, digging out the old foundation and reinforcing it with rocks from the creek bed, back-breaking work that left them both exhausted and covered in dirt. But by sunset, the structure stood straighter, and Mara's approval, grudging but real, warmed Caleb more than the physical labor. You're good at this, she said as they washed up at the pump. Working with your hands, I mean. You ever think about settling somewhere? Making something instead of running? The question caught Caleb off guard. I don't know that I'm welcome anywhere long enough to settle. You're welcome here. The words came out quickly, surprising them both. Mara looked away, color rising in her cheeks. I mean, until you're fully healed. After that, well, that's your choice. Something cracked open in Caleb's chest. That same feeling he'd had when Willow first offered her hand. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of it. What if I wanted to stay longer? The question escaped before he could stop it. What if I wanted to help you get this place ready for winter? Make sure everything's secure before the snows come. Mara's hand stilled on the pump handle. She stared at the water trickling over her fingers, and Caleb braced himself for rejection. Why? She asked finally. Why would you want to stay? Because for the first time in 3 years, I don't feel like I'm running from something. I feel like I might be moving toward something instead. The silence stretched out. A hawk cried overhead, and somewhere in the valley, coyotes began their evening song. All right, Mara said quietly. You can stay through winter, but you pull your weight and you respect that this is my land, my home. If I say leave, you leave. No arguments. Yes, ma'am. She nodded once, final, then headed toward the house. Caleb watched her go, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to, and why the prospect of spending a Montana winter in this isolated valley filled him with something dangerously close to contentment. That night, lying in his narrow bed, Caleb listened to the house settling around him. Heard Mara moving in her room, Willow talking in her sleep. Heard the wind testing the corners and the creak of floorboards under familiar feet. For the first time in 3 years, Caleb Cross fell asleep without dreaming of dying. He dreamed instead of fence posts standing straight, of a barn that didn't lean, of a little girl's laughter and a woman's grudging smile. He dreamed of staying. Winter announced itself gradually that year, creeping down from the high peaks in whispers of frost and shortened days. Caleb woke each morning to find the water in the basin skinned with ice, and the mountains wore their first dusting of snow like powdered sugar on dark cake. He'd been at the Bennett homestead for 6 weeks now, and the rhythm of the place had worked itself into his bones. Wake before dawn, feed the animals, haul water, mend whatever needed mending, fall into bed exhausted when the stars came out. Mara had stopped watching him with quite so much suspicion. She still maintained her distance, still spoke to him in that careful, neutral tone she might use with any hired hand. But she'd stopped checking the Winchester's location every time he moved, and twice now she'd actually laughed at something Willow said while he was in the room. Progress came in inches, not miles, but Caleb had learned to appreciate small victories. On a gray morning 3 days before November turned to December, Caleb stood in the barn surveying the winter supplies. They had enough hay to see the animals through, assuming the snows didn't last past March. The root cellar held potatoes, carrots, turnips, and preserves. Not abundance, but enough. Firewood stood stacked against the north wall of the house, split and seasoned, ready to feed the stove through the coldest months. We're short on meat. Caleb turned to find Mara in the barn doorway, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and loose strands of dark hair escaped her braid to frame her face. She looked softer somehow in this light, less like a fortress, and more like a woman carrying too much weight alone. "How short?" he asked. "We've got maybe 3 weeks of salt pork and some dried venison. After that, we're looking at a lean winter, unless we get fresh game soon." She crossed her arms, that familiar defensive posture. "I'm a fair shot, but I can't leave Willow alone long enough to hunt properly. Last winter we made it through on beans and potatoes mostly. This winter—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Caleb heard the worry underneath. Last winter she'd been alone. This winter she had an extra mouth to feed. "I can hunt," he said, "if you'll trust me with a rifle." Mara's expression shifted through several emotions: doubt, calculation, and something that might have been resignation. "You know these mountains?" "No, but I've hunted worse terrain, and I'm a decent tracker when I need to be." She studied him for a long moment, and Caleb stood still under that winter storm gaze, letting her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, Mara nodded. "All right, there's elk in the high country and deer lower down. You bring back meat, you've earned your keep through spring." She paused. "But Cross, if you take that rifle and don't come back, I'll assume you stole it, and I'll report it stolen. Understood?" "Understood." "Good. We'll pack you supplies for 3 days. Any longer than that, and I'm assuming you're dead or gone." Mara turned to leave, then stopped. "And Cross? Be careful up there. Weather can turn fast, and I don't need to explain to my daughter why another man didn't come home." The words landed with unexpected weight. Caleb realized with some surprise that Mara actually cared whether he made it back or not. Maybe not for his sake. Probably not for his sake. But for Willow's. The girl had gotten attached despite Mara's best efforts to keep distance between them. "I'll be careful," he promised. 2 hours later, Caleb set out with a borrowed rifle, 3 days' worth of hardtack and jerky, a bedroll, and Willow's fierce hug still warming his chest. "You come back, Mr. Cross," she'd whispered against his coat. "You promised you'd teach me to read the hard words in the second reader." "I'll be back," he told her, and meant it. The mountain swallowed him whole within an hour. Caleb followed game trails into higher elevation, reading the landscape the way he'd learned in the cavalry. Fresh deer sign here, elk droppings there, the scrape marks where a buck had rubbed velvet from his antlers. The forest closed in around him, pine and fir heavy with snow that hadn't yet fallen. The silence so complete it felt like prayer. Caleb made camp that first night in a shallow cave, building a small fire and rationing his food. The stars came out hard and bright, and he lay wrapped in his bedroll thinking about the homestead below. Wondering if Mara was checking the door lock twice, if Willow was reading by lamplight, if they felt his absence the way he felt theirs. Strange how quickly a place could start feeling like home when you'd spent years believing you didn't deserve one. The second day brought fresh snow and elk sign. Caleb tracked a small herd to a meadow where they'd pawed through the snow to reach frozen grass. He settled into position, sighted down the rifle barrel, and waited. Hunting was 90% patience and 10% precision. He'd learned that truth the hard way, watching men die because they rushed their shots. The elk appeared near dusk, a young bull, maybe 3 years old, still carrying good weight before the hard winter set in. Caleb exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and dropped the animal clean. One shot through the heart, the way his father had taught him when Caleb was barely older than Willow. "Thank you," he said quietly to the fallen elk, the way his mother had taught him. "For your life, for this meat, for the chance to provide." Dressing and butchering the elk took hours. Caleb worked by firelight, his hands slick with blood and fat, preserving every usable scrap. Meat for eating, hide for leather, sinew for thread, antlers for tools. Nothing wasted, everything honored. By the time he finished, exhaustion pulled at him like an undertow. He slept hard that night, his body pushed past its limits, and woke to something wrong. The temperature had dropped sharply. The sky had gone from star-bright to ominous gray, and the wind carried a smell Caleb recognized from a dozen winter campaigns. Storm coming, big one. He broke camp fast, loading the elk meat onto an improvised travois. The journey down should have taken 6 hours. Caleb needed to make it in 4 before the storm hit in earnest. He pushed hard, ignoring the protest in his healing leg, focusing only on the trail ahead and the growing urgency in his gut. 3 hours in, the snow started. Not the gentle flurries that had dusted the ground earlier, but thick, heavy flakes that fell like a curtain descending. Visibility dropped to 20 feet, then 10. The wind picked up, driving the snow sideways, and Caleb's world narrowed to the next step, the next landmark, the next breath. He was still 2 miles from the homestead when the blizzard hit full force. Caleb had survived winter storms before, had learned to navigate by instinct when sight failed. But this storm carried a viciousness that spoke of deadly intent. The temperature plummeted. Ice formed on his beard and eyebrows. His hands went numb inside his gloves, and the travois dragged like an anchor. He should leave the meat. Logic said drop the extra weight and focus on survival. But Mara and Willow needed this elk. They needed it to make it through winter, and Caleb would be damned if he'd come back empty-handed after promising Willow he'd return. So he pushed forward, one step at a time, pulling the travois through snow that climbed to his knees. His legs screamed protest, the old wound threatening to tear. His lungs burned from breathing frozen air. But Caleb kept moving because stopping meant dying, and dying meant abandoning 2 people who'd saved his life when they had every reason to let him die. The homestead appeared like a miracle through the storm, lamplight glowing in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Caleb stumbled forward, nearly fell, caught himself on the porch railing. The door flew open before he could knock. "Inside!" Mara grabbed his coat and hauled him through the doorway. "Willow, get blankets! Christ, Cross, you're half frozen!" Caleb couldn't feel his hands well enough to work the buttons. Mara did it for him, her fingers quick and competent despite the trembling he saw in them. Not from cold, from fear, he realized. She'd been afraid he wouldn't make it back. "The meat," he managed through chattering teeth. "On the porch. Elk. Full-grown bull. To hell with the meat." But even as she said it, Mara was pulling him toward the stove. "Willow, help me get his coat off. We need to warm him up slowly or he'll go into shock." The next hour passed in a blur of blankets and hot coffee, and Willow's worried face swimming in and out of focus. Caleb's body fought between the warmth of the house and the bone-deep cold he'd carried in from the storm. He shook so hard his teeth rattled, then felt nothing, then shook again. "Stay with me," Mara commanded, her hand gripping his shoulder. "You don't get to die now, you stubborn fool, not after making it this far." "Wasn't planning on dying," Caleb mumbled. "Got a promise to keep." "What promise?" "Told Willow I'd teach her the hard words." Something shifted in Mara's expression, softened maybe, or cracked open just enough to let light through. She squeezed his shoulder once, firm, then stood. "Willow, stay with him. I'm bringing in that meat before the wolves find it." "Mama, you can't go out in this." "Watch me." Mara disappeared into the storm, and Caleb wanted to protest, wanted to go after her, but his body wouldn't cooperate. Willow curled up next to him, her small body radiating heat, and Caleb let himself drift. When Mara returned 20 minutes later, covered in snow and dragging the last of the elk meat, Caleb had regained enough function to feel ashamed that she'd had to do his work, but she waved off his attempted apology. You killed it and got it home. I can handle the rest. She looked at Willow. Get him more coffee and see if he left. Over the next 2 days, while the storm raged outside and snow piled against the windows, Caleb recovered his strength and Mara processed the elk. She worked with the focused intensity he'd come to recognize, salting meat, rendering fat, scraping the hide. Willow helped where she could, and Caleb contributed what strength he had. They fell into an easy rhythm, the three of them, working together in the warm house while the world outside turned white and deadly. Willow read aloud from her books, stumbling over difficult words until Caleb or Mara helped her. They played simple card games in the evening, and Mara told stories about her childhood in Missouri, about parents who'd died young and a brother she hadn't seen in 10 years. You ever think about finding him? Caleb asked one night. Your brother? Mara's hand stilled on the quilt she was mending. Every day, but I don't even know if he's alive. Last letter I got was 6 years ago, from somewhere in California. He was looking for gold, like every other fool with a dream and a pickaxe. Maybe he found it. Maybe. She resumed her stitching, precise and even. Or maybe he's dead in some unnamed gulch, and I'll never know. That's the frontier for you. People disappear, and you're left wondering. You ever think about leaving, going somewhere safer? The question had been on Caleb's mind for weeks. This isolated valley, beautiful as it was, offered no neighbors, no community, no support if things went wrong. One bad winter, one injury, one streak of bad luck, and Mara and Willow could easily end up 2 more names added to the frontier's long list of casualties. Every single day, Mara admitted quietly. But this land is mine. Daniel and I filed the claim, built this house with our own hands. I put him in the ground out there behind the house. If I leave, I'm admitting that everything we worked for, everything he died for, was for nothing. That's not... I know what you're going to say. She met his eyes, and the pain there was raw and immediate. I know it's not rational. I know staying here probably makes me a fool. But this is all I have left of him, Cross. This land, this house, the trees he planted, the fence line he measured out. I can't just walk away. Caleb understood that kind of grief. The way it rooted you to places even when leaving would be wiser. Then you need help. You can't do this alone forever. I've managed so far. Barely. The word came out harsher than he intended, but Caleb pressed on. You're exhausted, Mara. You work yourself to the bone, and you're still one disaster away from losing everything. The barn needs complete rebuilding. The roof on this house won't last another 2 winters, and you're short on everything from nails to lamp oil. So what would you have me do? Anger flared in her voice, but underneath it, Caleb heard desperation. Marry some stranger for his labor? Sell to the first land speculator who comes calling? Give up and move to town to take in laundry, or let me stay? The words fell into sudden silence. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the house, everything went still. What? Mara's voice barely rose above a whisper. Let me stay, Caleb repeated, committing now to the truth he'd been circling for weeks. Not as a guest or someone passing through. Let me stay and help you build this place into what it should be. Help you give Willow a future that's more than just survival. Why? The question wasn't accusatory now, just genuinely baffled. Why would you want to tie yourself to this place? To us? Caleb looked at Willow, sleeping peacefully in the rocking chair with a book open on her lap. He looked at the house around them. Humble, but clean and warm and filled with the evidence of stubborn hope. He looked at Mara, this fierce woman who'd saved his life despite every reason not to. Because for the first time since my brother died, I feel like I'm supposed to be somewhere, he said simply. Like maybe I washed up here for a reason. You need help, and I need... He struggled for the right word. Purpose, I guess. A reason to be more than just a ghost passing through. Mara stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the storm-shrouded darkness. You don't know what you're asking, she said finally. This land is hard. The winters are brutal. The nearest town is 15 miles of rough trail, and the neighbors, when we had neighbors, moved on years ago. It's lonely and dangerous, and half the time I wonder if I'm crazy for staying. I know all that. And you still want to stay? Yes. She turned back to face him, and in the lamplight, Caleb saw the battle playing out across her features. Hope warring with fear, the desire for help fighting against the risk of trust. I can't pay you, she said. Not in cash anyway. Room and board, and a share of whatever we manage to grow or sell. That's all I can offer. That's enough. And I won't. Mara's cheeks colored slightly. This is a business arrangement, Cross. Nothing more. You'll have your own space, and there are boundaries that won't be crossed. Understood? The clarification stung more than Caleb wanted to admit, but he nodded. Understood. Then, she drew a breath, steadying herself. Then you can stay. Through the winter at minimum. After that, we'll see. Relief flooded through Caleb, so intense it left him dizzy. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've lived through a Montana winter in this valley. You might change your mind. But Caleb knew he wouldn't. He'd found something here worth holding on to, worth fighting for. A little girl who believed in second chances. A woman who carried her grief like armor, but still had room for mercy. A place that needed him as much as he needed it. The storm blew itself out 3 days later, leaving the world transformed. Snow lay 4 feet deep in places, sculpted into fantastic drifts by the wind. The sky cleared to brilliant blue, and the sun on the snow was so bright it hurt to look at directly. Caleb and Mara dug out together, clearing paths to the barn, the chicken coop, the woodpile. They worked in companionable silence, their breath pluming in the frozen air. Willow made snow angels and built a snowman with a carrot nose and button eyes. Looks good, Caleb said when they'd finished clearing the main paths. Mara surveyed their work, then nodded. It'll do. Until the next storm, anyway. How many more you think we'll get? 3, maybe 4 big ones before spring, plus a dozen smaller ones. She looked at him sidelong. Still want to stay? More than ever. Something in his tone made Mara pause. She turned to face him fully, studying his face with that careful intensity he'd come to recognize. What happened to you out there? She asked quietly. In that storm, something changed. Caleb considered lying, then decided Mara deserved better. I realized I wanted to live. Sounds simple, maybe, but for 3 years I've been walking around like a dead man. Going through the motions but not really caring if I saw the next sunrise. Out there in that blizzard, dragging that elk meat home, I cared. I wanted to make it back. I wanted to keep my promise to Willow. He trailed off, not quite ready to finish that thought. Not quite ready to admit that part of what drove him through the storm was the image of Mara's face, the need to see her again. Wanted what? Mara pressed. To be someone worth saving, Caleb finished instead. You and Willow, you saved my life. I want to be worthy of that. I want to build something instead of just destroying. I want to matter. Mara's expression softened, the winter storm in her eyes giving way to something warmer. You already matter, Cross. Willow thinks you hung the moon, and I... She stopped, seeming to catch herself. I'm grateful for your help. That's all. But it wasn't all, and they both knew it. Something was shifting between them, slow as glaciers, but just as inexorable. The careful distance Mara maintained had started to feel less like protection and more like habit. And Caleb found himself wanting to cross that distance, to reach for connection he'd denied himself for so long. Not yet, though. Mara needed time, needed space to let go of her grief and anger at her own pace. Caleb could wait. After 3 years of running, he'd finally found a place worth staying for. He could be patient. That night, after Willow had gone to bed, Mara surprised him. I want to show you something, she said, pulling a small wooden box from the high shelf. She set it on the table between them and lifted the lid. Inside lay a collection of small treasures, a wedding ring, a tintype photograph, a few letters tied with faded ribbon, and a pocket watch. This was Daniel's, Mara said softly, touching the watch. His father's before that. He always said he'd pass it down to our son, but her voice caught. Willow was our only child, and then he was gone. Caleb looked at the photograph. A young couple, Mara barely recognizable with her bright smile and soft edges, the man beside her tall and proud with kind eyes. He looks like a good man, Caleb said. He was. Mara traced the edge of the photograph. He believed in building things, in making the world, seeing this homestead thrive. She closed the box carefully. I'm showing you this because I need you to understand something, Cross. When I look at you, part of me still sees the uniform, still sees the men who took him from me. I'm working on it, but it's hard. I know. But another part of me sees a man who's trying to be better than his past, who kept his promise to my daughter even when it almost killed him, who works without complaining and doesn't ask for more than his share. She met his eyes. I can't promise that the first part won't win sometimes. I can't promise I won't be unfair or harsh or closed off. But I want you to know, I'm trying. The honesty in her words, the vulnerability, hit Caleb square in the chest. That's all anyone can ask for. Mara smiled then, small and tentative, but real. And Caleb thought maybe Willow was right. Maybe when Mara smiled, it really was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Winter deepened around them, and Caleb settled into his new life. He took over the heavier work, splitting wood, hauling water, maintaining the buildings. Mara handled the cooking and preserving, the chickens and the cow, the 100 small tasks that kept a household running. Willow helped both of them, learning from Mara's practical wisdom and Caleb's patient teaching. They celebrated Christmas modestly, a pine branch decorated with paper chains Willow made, simple gifts exchanged by the fire. Caleb whittled a set of wooden animals for Willow and fashioned a new handle for Mara's favorite kitchen knife. Mara knitted him a scarf from wool she'd spun herself, and Willow gave him a drawing of the three of them standing in front of the house, smiling. Caleb hung that drawing above his bed and looked at it every night before sleeping. The new year came quietly. They marked it with a special supper, venison stew, and the last of Mara's preserves, biscuits made with hoarded white flour. Willow fell asleep early, worn out from playing in the snow, and Caleb and Mara sat by the fire, content in comfortable silence. I've been thinking, Mara said eventually, about spring, about what we need to do to make this place sustainable long-term. And? We need cash income. The land provides food, but we need money for supplies, for repairs, for things we can't make or grow ourselves. She stared into the fire. I've been selling eggs and butter in town when I can, but it's not enough. We need something more reliable. What did you have in mind? There's talk of the railroad coming through within 5 years. If that happens, this whole valley will open up. Land values will rise. Opportunities will come. Mara leaned forward, intensity burning in her eyes. But we need to be ready. We need buildings in good repair, fences that will hold stock, maybe even a second well. We need to turn this homestead into a real working ranch. Caleb felt something spark to life in his chest. Purpose, ambition, hope. That's a big undertaking. I know, but with two of us working, it's possible. She looked at him directly. If you're serious about staying, I'm serious about building something that lasts. I'm serious. Then we start planning tomorrow. They shook on it, Mara's hand small and calloused in his, and Caleb realized they'd just made a commitment that went beyond simple partnership. They were building a future together, whether either of them was ready to call it that or not. That night, lying in his bed listening to the wind test the corners of the house, Caleb thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the dying man in the dust to this, a purpose, a place, people who depended on him and whom he could depend on in return. Willow had been right. He wasn't ready to give up. He'd just been tired and hurting and lost. But now he'd found his way, or maybe it had found him. Outside, the Montana winter gripped the land in frozen fists. But inside the Bennett homestead, warmth bloomed like flowers in spring, fed by work and hope, and the fragile beginnings of something that might someday become family. Spring arrived like a promise whispered in the dark, tentative at first, then building to a roar. The snow retreated up the mountainsides, revealing muddy earth and the first brave shoots of green. The creek, frozen solid for months, broke free with a sound like cannon fire, swelling into a torrent that sang day and night. Birds returned in waves, filling the valley with song, and Willow spent hours watching them build nests in the eaves of the barn. Caleb stood at the edge of the vegetable garden, turning over soil that smelled of rebirth and possibility. His leg had healed completely over the winter, leaving only a pale scar, and the occasional ache when storms approached. He'd put on weight too, good weight, muscle earned from months of hard labor. The hollow-eyed ghost who'd arrived last fall barely resembled the man he'd become. "You're going to wear yourself out before planning even starts." He turned to find Mara approaching with 2 tin cups of coffee, her hair loose around her shoulders for once, instead of pulled back in its usual severe braid. The sight of her stopped his breath for a moment. She looked younger like this, softer, the morning sun catching copper highlights he'd never noticed before. "Just getting a feel for the soil," he said, accepting the coffee, "trying to figure out what'll grow best where." Mara surveyed the plot with a practiced eye. Daniel always planted potatoes on the north end, beans and squash in the middle, corn on the south side where it gets the most sun. Worked well enough. What if we expanded it, added another 20 feet on the east side? With what seeds? But Mara's tone held curiosity rather than dismissal. "We're already planting everything we saved from last year." "I've been thinking about that." Caleb set down his coffee and pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I made a list. Things we could sell in town to raise cash for supplies. Fresh eggs we don't need, butter, maybe some of that elk hide I finished tanning. Could probably get enough for seed and some laying hens to replace the ones we lost to that fox." Mara took the list, scanning it with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "You've been planning this?" "All winter. Seemed like the thing to do if I was serious about staying." "And you are? Serious about staying?" The question hung between them, weighted with more than its simple words. They'd worked side by side for months now, had survived blizzards and bitter cold, had built something fragile and precious in this isolated valley. But neither of them had spoken plainly about what came next, about whether this partnership had a future beyond simple survival. "I'm serious," Caleb said quietly. "Unless you want me gone." "I don't." The words came quick, almost startled, as if Mara surprised herself by saying them. Color rose in her cheeks. "I mean, you've been helpful. Willow's grown attached. It makes sense to continue the arrangement." Caleb bit back a smile at her careful deflection. "Just makes sense, does it?" "Don't read more into it than there is, Cross." But her eyes said something different, something that made his pulse quicken. Before he could respond, Willow came tearing around the corner of the house, her face alight with excitement. "Mama, Mr. Cross, come quick! There's someone coming up the trail!" Visitors were rare enough to be noteworthy. Mara's expression shuddered immediately, her hand moving instinctively to check the knife at her belt. Caleb followed her gaze to the ridge and spotted the rider, single horseman, moving slow and easy, no obvious threat. "Stay behind me," Mara told Willow. They walked together to the front of the house, Caleb positioning himself slightly ahead of Mara despite her bristling independence. Old habits died hard, and his instinct to protect had only grown stronger over the winter. The rider resolved into an older man, maybe 60, with a weathered face and kind eyes. He wore rough work clothes and led a pack mule loaded with supplies. When he spotted them, he raised one hand in greeting. "Hello, the house," he called. "Name's Jacob Miller. I'm not looking for trouble, just hoping to water my animals and maybe trade for some food if you've got extra." Mara relaxed fractionally, but didn't lower her guard. "You're a long way from anywhere, Mr. Miller." "That I am, ma'am." He dismounted, moving slow and deliberate, showing he meant no harm. "Been trapping up in the high country all winter, heading back to town to sell my furs and resupply before next season. Town's that way." Mara pointed south. "You're going the wrong direction." "Yes, ma'am, I know. But I heard tell there was a widow woman living out this way, and I wanted to check you were all right. Winter was hard this year, lost a few folks to it." Something in Mara's posture shifted. "You knew my husband?" "Daniel Bennett?" "Yes, ma'am. Good man. We trapped together some before he settled down with you. I was real sorry to hear about his passing." Miller's gaze moved to Caleb, assessing. "Seems you're managing all right, though." "This is Caleb Cross," Mara said, her voice carefully neutral. "He's helping with the homestead." "Good, good. A place like this needs a man's labor." Miller smiled at Willow. "And who's this young lady?" "I'm Willow. I'm 9 years old and I can read 2 whole books." "Is that so? Well, aren't you something?" Miller reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in oilcloth. "I've got something here that might interest a reader. Friend of mine was clearing out his house, gave me a stack of books to trade. You think your mama would let you pick one? Willow's eyes went wide as moons. She looked to Mara, who hesitated, then nodded. One book, and what do we say? Thank you, Mr. Miller. While Willow examined the books with reverent hands, Miller turned back to Mara and Caleb. I wasn't lying about needing water for my animals, but I also wanted to pass along some news from town. There's talk of the railroad survey coming through this summer. They're looking at potential routes, and this valley's on the list. Caleb felt Mara stiffen beside him. This was the development she'd mentioned, the opportunity that could change everything. How certain is it? Mara asked. Certain enough that land speculators are already sniffing around, buying up claims from folks who'd rather take cash now than wait for maybe later. Miller's expression turned serious. I'm telling you this because Daniel was a friend, and I'd hate to see you pressured into selling before you know what you've got. Land out here isn't worth much now, but if that railroad comes through, values could jump 10, 20 times. We're not selling, Mara said firmly. Didn't figure you would. You're Daniel's wife through and through, stubborn as the day is long. He said it with affection. But you should know there's men who won't take no for an answer, men who'll use pressure or tricks or worse to get what they want. Let them try. Mara's voice carried steel. This land is mine, legal and clear. No one's taking it. Miller nodded approvingly. That's the spirit. But keep your eyes open, Mrs. Bennett, and keep your rifle close. They shared a simple meal with Miller, beans and cornbread, coffee strong enough to strip paint. He told stories of his winter in the mountains, of the wildlife he'd seen, and the close calls he'd survived. Willow hung on every word, and even Mara seemed to relax, laughing at Miller's self-deprecating humor. When he prepared to leave, Miller shook Caleb's hand with surprising strength. You take care of them, he said quietly, too low for Mara to hear. Daniel was a good man, and his family deserves protecting. I intend to, Caleb replied. They watched Miller disappear back down the trail, then stood in the yard as the dust settled. Willow had already run off with her new book, leaving Caleb and Mara alone. You think he's right? Mara asked. About the land speculators? I think men see opportunity, and some of them don't care who they hurt to grab it. Caleb looked at the homestead, the house they'd reinforced over winter, the garden plot ready for planting, the barn standing straight for the first time in years. But we're ready for them. This place is stronger than it was, and so are you. So are we, Mara corrected softly. This isn't just my fight anymore, Cross. Like it or not, you're part of this now. The acknowledgement warmed him more than the spring sun. I like it just fine. Mara smiled then, that rare, full smile that transformed her face. Come on, we've got planting to do. They worked together through the lengthening days of spring, turning Miller's warning into motivation. If trouble was coming, they'd meet it with a homestead that proved their commitment, their capability, their right to this land. Caleb rebuilt the chicken coop properly, with wire mesh to keep out predators and nesting boxes that made egg collection easier. Mara started a second garden plot, planting herbs and medicinal plants she could dry and sell. Together, they repaired every inch of fence line, replaced rotting boards in the barn, and dug a new well closer to the house. Willow grew like a weed, her reading improving daily as she devoured the book Miller had given her, a collection of folk tales that she insisted on reading aloud each evening. She followed Caleb around during the day, asking endless questions and helping where she could. Mr. Cross, why do you think Mr. Miller said those men might try to take our land? She asked one afternoon while they mended harnesses together. Caleb chose his words carefully. Some people see something valuable and think they deserve it more than whoever has it. They forget that value comes from work, from building something with your own hands. But we worked for it. Mama and Papa built this place from nothing. That's right. And that means something, Willow. It means you've got a right to defend what's yours. She was quiet for a moment, her small fingers working the leather with surprising skill. Would you help us defend it if those men came? Yes. Even if it meant fighting. The question landed heavy. Caleb had spent 3 years trying to forget the violence of his past, trying to become someone who built instead of destroyed. But looking at Willow's earnest face, at the homestead they'd worked so hard to improve, he knew the truth. Even if it meant fighting, he confirmed. Some things are worth fighting for, little bit. And you and your mama, this place you're building, that's worth fighting for. Willow threw her arms around him in a fierce hug. I'm glad you stayed, Mr. Cross. I'm glad I found you that day. Caleb's throat went tight. Me too, Willow. Me too. That evening, after Willow had gone to bed, Mara found Caleb on the porch watching the stars emerge. She settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She loves you, you know, Mara said quietly. Willow, she started calling you her friend instead of Mr. Cross when she talks about you. She's a special kid. You've raised her well. I've tried. It's hard doing it alone, wondering if I'm getting it right, if she'll grow up to be strong enough for this world. Mara's voice wavered slightly. Sometimes I'm so tired, Cross. Tired of being the only one making decisions, the only one standing watch, the only one she can count on. You're not alone anymore. Mara turned to look at him, and in the starlight her eyes held a vulnerability he'd rarely seen. Aren't I? You could leave tomorrow, ride out and never come back. Men do it all the time out here. They get restless or bored or they find somewhere easier. Why should you be different? Because I made a choice to stay, and I don't make promises lightly. Caleb held her gaze. I'm not leaving, Mara. Not tomorrow, not next month, not when things get hard. I'm here for as long as you'll have me. Why? The question was barely a whisper. Why tie yourself to this place, to us? You could have anything, go anywhere. Why choose this? Because this is the first place that's felt like home since before the war. Because Willow reminds me that good still exists in the world. Because working beside you makes me feel like I'm building something that matters. He paused, gathering courage. And because when I look at you, I see the strongest person I've ever met. Someone who survived grief that would have broken most people, who kept going when giving up would have been easier. How could I walk away from that? Mara's breath caught. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared at him with an expression caught between fear and longing. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. Her palm was calloused from work, her fingers rough from the constant labor of frontier life. But her touch was gentle, tentative, as if she'd forgotten how to reach for connection and was only now remembering. I'm not ready, she said finally. For anything more than this, I'm not ready to let go of Daniel, to stop being angry, to risk my heart again. I know. But I don't want you to leave either. I want you here, working beside me, helping with Willow, being part of this. Her grip on his hand tightened. Is that selfish of me? Asking you to stay when I can't give you more? No. Caleb squeezed back, gentle but firm. It's honest, and I'd rather have your honesty than false promises. They sat like that as the stars wheeled overhead, hands linked, not speaking, but not needing to. Something had shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but the acknowledgement of possibility, of a future that might, someday, include more than partnership. The weeks blurred into summer. The garden exploded with growth, beans climbing their poles, squash vines spreading across the ground, corn stalks reaching for the sky. The chickens Caleb had bought with the money from selling the elk hide proved to be excellent layers, and Mara's butter earned praise in town that translated to steady sales. But Miller's warning proved prescient. The first man arrived in late June, riding a fine horse and wearing city clothes that had no business in this country. He introduced himself as Theodore Ashford, representative of the Western Development Company, and spoke in the smooth tones of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Mrs. Bennett, I'm here to make you an offer on your property. He smiled, showing too many teeth. My company is prepared to pay fair market value plus 20%. Cash money? Enough to relocate somewhere more comfortable, maybe even send your daughter to a proper school. Mara stood on the porch, arms crossed, her expression carved from stone. My land's not for sale, Mr. Ashford. Now, I understand you're attached to this place, but let's be realistic. Ashford's smile never wavered. A woman alone, trying to maintain a working homestead. It's admirable, but ultimately unsustainable. My offer would allow you to— She's not alone. Caleb stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd been shoeing the horse, but something in Ashford's tone had set his instincts jangling. He moved to stand beside Mara, close enough to make a statement. Ashford's smile thinned. "And you are?" Caleb crossed Bennett. "I see." Ashford's gaze moved between them, calculating. "Well, Mr. Cross, surely you can see the sense in accepting my employer's generous offer. This valley will be transformed once the railroad comes through. Progress waits for no one." "Then progress will have to wait for us," Mara said flatly, "because we're not selling. Not now, not ever." "Mrs. Bennett, I don't think you understand the opportunity. I understand just fine. You want my land because it'll be worth 10 times what you're offering once the railroad's confirmed. But this isn't about money, Mr. Ashford. This is my home. It's where my husband is buried, where my daughter is growing up, where I'm building a future. You can't put a price on that." Ashford's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. "Everyone has a price, Mrs. Bennett. It's just a matter of finding it." "Then you'll be looking a long time." Mara's hand moved to rest on the rifle leaning against the porch post. "I think you should leave now." "Of course, but I'll be back with a revised offer. I'm certain we can reach an agreement." He tipped his hat, mockery in the gesture. "Good day to you both." They watched him ride away, neither speaking until he disappeared from view. "That's not the end of it," Caleb said quietly. "I know." Mara's jaw was set, determined. Men like that don't give up easy. "Then neither do we." Over the next weeks, Ashford returned twice more, each time with a higher offer and a thinner veneer of civility. Mara refused him each time, her resolve never wavering. But other things began to happen, small things that could have been coincidence but felt like something more. The fence on the south pasture got cut one night, letting 3 chickens escape to the coyotes. A week later, someone dumped contaminated water upstream of their well, forcing them to dig a new one. Then their best-laying hen disappeared, and Caleb found boot prints that didn't match any of theirs. "It's harassment," Mara said through gritted teeth as they surveyed the latest damage. Their vegetable garden trampled, a full week's growth destroyed. "They're trying to wear us down, make us think we can't defend this place." "It won't work." Caleb knelt to examine the boot prints clearly visible in the soft earth. "But we need to be smarter. Set watches at night, maybe get a dog to alert us. Or we could go to the sheriff." "And tell him what? That we think someone's harassing us, but we've got no proof who? Ashford's not stupid enough to get his own hands dirty." Mara's shoulders sagged. "So we just endure it?" "No." Caleb stood, his expression hardening into something that reminded him uncomfortably of his cavalry days. "We make it clear that this land is defended. We make whoever's doing this understand that the cost of continuing is higher than any railroad land is worth." That night, Caleb took the first watch. He settled into the barn loft with a clear view of the approaches, the rifle across his knees, and waited. The hours crawled past. Around midnight, he heard it, the careful scrape of boots trying to move quietly, the soft nicker of a horse being held back. 2 figures moved through the darkness toward the chicken coop. Caleb watched them for a moment, memorizing their movements, then stood and called out. "That's far enough!" The figures froze. In the moonlight, Caleb could make out 2 men, young and rough-looking, the kind who'd do anything for a few dollars. "This is private property," Caleb continued, his voice carrying the command he'd learned in the cavalry. "And you're trespassing. Leave now, and we'll call it a mistake. Stay, and I shoot." "You wouldn't dare," one of them said, but his voice shook. "Try me." Caleb worked the rifle's action, the sound unmistakable in the quiet night. "I've got a clear shot at both of you. And unlike you boys sneaking around in the dark, I've got the law on my side. Self-defense is a powerful thing." The 2 figures looked at each other, then began backing away. "Tell Ashford this land is defended," Caleb called after them. "Tell him the next person who comes uninvited gets worse than words." They ran then, crashing through the underbrush to where their horses waited. Caleb listened until the sound of hoofbeats faded, then climbed down from the loft. Mara stood in the doorway of the house, her rifle in her hands and Willow peeking around her skirts. "They gone?" Mara asked. "For now." She nodded, satisfied, then ushered Willow back inside. But before following, she turned back to Caleb. "Thank you," she said simply. "For staying, for fighting, for caring enough to defend what's ours." It's my home too, Caleb replied. Worth defending. The harassment stopped after that night. Ashford came one more time, his offer doubled but his confidence shaken. When Mara refused yet again, he left with barely disguised frustration and didn't return. Summer deepened into abundance. The garden produced more than they could eat, and Mara spent long days preserving and pickling, building up stores for the winter. Caleb took the surplus to town and came back with coin that clinked satisfyingly in the jar Mara kept hidden in the rafters. One evening in late August, after a particularly good harvest, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Willow had fallen asleep in the rocking chair, exhausted from a day spent helping can tomatoes. We did it, Mara said softly. We survived the winter, defended our land, built something sustainable. We actually did it. You doubted we would? Every single day. She laughed, but there was wonder in it. I kept waiting for everything to fall apart, the way it always does. But it didn't. We're thriving, Cross. For the first time since Daniel died, we're actually thriving. Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd faced down speculators and sabotage, who'd worked until her hands bled, who'd never stopped fighting for her daughter's future. She was beautiful in the golden light, and he realized with sudden clarity that somewhere along the way, his respect and admiration had transformed into something deeper. Mara, he started, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She turned to him, and he saw the same realization dawning in her eyes, the same awareness that they'd built more than a working partnership, that the careful distance between them had been slowly, inevitably closing. Don't, she whispered. Not yet. I'm still not ready. I know, but someday? Mara reached for his hand again, that gesture that had become familiar over the summer. Someday, she agreed. When I can let go of the past enough to reach for the future. When I can look at you and not see the uniform first. When I can trust that you won't disappear like everyone else. I'll wait, Caleb promised, however long it takes. They sat hand in hand as the stars emerged, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their past lives and were slowly, carefully building something new. The first hard frost came in late September, turning the grass white and brittle as bone. Caleb woke before dawn to find ice crystals on the inside of the window, delicate as lace, and knew the season was turning again. 1 year. He'd been at the Bennett homestead for 1 full year, arriving as a broken man ready to die and staying to become something he'd never imagined, someone with roots, with purpose, with people who mattered more than his own damaged past. He dressed quietly and stepped into the main room to find Mara already awake, standing by the stove with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She turned at his footsteps, and the smile that touched her lips came easier now than it had in months. Coffee's hot, she said, and I was thinking today might be a good day to slaughter that pig we've been fattening. Get it done before the real cold sets in. I'll sharpen the knives after breakfast. Caleb accepted the cup she handed him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. That simple touch, so casual now, would have been impossible 6 months ago. You hear that wind last night? Storm's coming, probably within a week. I heard it. Mara settled at the table, cupping her own coffee. Which means we need to finish harvesting the last of the squash and bring in the rest of the hay. Mrs. Henderson in town said her husband's almanac is calling for an early winter, possibly harder than last year. They fell into easy discussion of the day's work, the weeks ahead, the preparations needed. This had become their morning ritual, planning together, sharing the mental load that Mara had carried alone for so long. Willow emerged eventually, yawning and rubbing her eyes, and climbed into Caleb's lap without hesitation. Morning, little bit, he said, wrapping an arm around her to keep her warm. You ready for another day of hard work? Do I have to be? She burrowed against his chest. Can't we just read stories instead? Stories are for evening, when the work's done. Mara's voice held affection despite the words. You know that, Willow Grace. I know, but I finished my book last night, and now I've got nothing new to read. Caleb and Mara exchanged a look. They'd been discussing this very problem. Willow had devoured every book they owned, some of them multiple times. Her hunger for learning, for stories, for knowledge beyond their isolated valley. had grown impossible to ignore. "We'll figure something out," Mara said. "Maybe on the next trip to town, we can see about getting you some new books." Willow perked up immediately. "Really? Can I come this time, please?" Mara hesitated. The 15-mile trip to town was long and occasionally dangerous, and she'd never brought Willow along before. But Caleb saw the calculation in her eyes. The girl was getting older, needed to learn the wider world beyond their homestead. "We'll see," Mara said, which Willow correctly interpreted as a maybe leaning toward yes. She squealed with delight and ran to get dressed, her sleepiness forgotten. "You're going soft," Caleb teased when Willow had gone. "Maybe." Mara's expression turned serious. "But she needs more than we can give her here, Cross. She's smart. Too smart to spend her whole life isolated. She needs proper schooling, needs to meet other children, needs opportunities." "I know." The admission cost Caleb something. He loved their life here, the three of them against the world. But Mara was right. Keeping Willow isolated wasn't protecting her. It was limiting her. "What are you thinking?" "There's talk of the town building a proper schoolhouse, hiring a real teacher. If that happens, we might consider, I don't know, maybe finding a way for Willow to attend at least part of the year." The implications of that hung heavy between them. Town was too far for daily travel, which meant Willow would need to board somewhere during school terms. It meant their little family would be fractured for months at a time. "That's years down the road yet," Caleb said, seeing the pain in Mara's face. "Let's not borrow tomorrow's troubles." "You're right." Mara stood, shaking off the melancholy. "Come on, that pig won't slaughter itself." They worked together all day, the familiar rhythm of shared labor making even unpleasant tasks bearable. Caleb handled the actual slaughter, quick and clean the way his father had taught him, while Mara and Willow prepared for the butchering. By evening, they had fresh meat hanging in the cold cellar, sausages curing, and enough lard rendered to last through winter. Exhausted and spattered with blood despite their aprons, they cleaned up at the pump as the sun set. Willow had already gone inside to wash properly, leaving Caleb and Mara alone in the gathering dusk. "Good day's work," Mara said, scrubbing at her forearms. "We've got enough meat now to make it through anything winter throws at us." "We make a good team." "We do." She paused, water dripping from her hands. "Cross, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." The seriousness in her tone made Caleb's pulse quicken. "What is it?" "This arrangement we have, you working for room and board and a share of what we produce, it's not fair anymore." Caleb's stomach dropped. Was she asking him to leave after all? Had he misread everything between them? "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've put a year of hard labor into this place. You've rebuilt the barn, expanded the garden, defended our land, kept us fed through winter. You've done the work of a partner, not a hired hand." Mara turned to face him fully. "This homestead is as much yours now as it is mine. I want to make it legal." "Legal how?" "I've been talking to Mr. Henderson, the land agent in town. He says I can add you to the deed, make you a legal co-owner of this property." She spoke quickly now, as if afraid she'd lose her nerve. "It wouldn't be a marriage or anything like that, just a business arrangement. But it would mean you'd have real stake in this place, real rights. If something happened to me, you and Willow wouldn't lose everything." The offer stunned him into silence. Caleb had owned nothing for 3 years, had been a ghost passing through other people's lives. And now Mara was offering him half of everything she had, everything she and Daniel had built. "Mara, I can't accept that. This land is yours and Willow's." "It's ours." Her voice carried absolute certainty. "You've earned it, Cross. Every acre, every building, every fence post. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you what you've already paid for with sweat and blood, and staying when leaving would have been easier." "What if I do leave someday? What if—" "You won't." Mara stepped closer, close enough that Caleb could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. "I know you won't. I've watched you for a year now, watched you pour everything you have into this place. I've seen the way you look at these mountains like they're home, the way you light up when Willow shows you something she's learned. You're not going anywhere, Caleb Cross. You're planted here just as deep as I am." The use of his first name, rare from her lips, hit him like a physical touch. She was right. Somewhere between that first night when Willow found him, and now, this valley had become his home in a way nowhere else ever had. "Then yes," he said quietly, "I accept. And thank you, Mara, for seeing me as more than the man I was. I see the man you are. That's all that matters. They stood there in the twilight, something shifting between them again. The careful boundaries they'd maintained were still there, but growing thinner. Caleb could feel it in the way Mara didn't step back, in the softness of her expression, in the possibility humming in the air between them. "Mama, Mr. Cross, come inside!" Willow's voice shattered the moment. "I made biscuits all by myself." They broke apart, laughing, and headed inside to discover Willow's biscuits, slightly lopsided and burned on the bottom, but made with such pride that they ate every one and declared them the best they'd ever tasted. The trip to town came a week later, all three of them making the journey together for the first time. Willow rode in front of Caleb, chattering excitedly about everything she saw, while Mara rode alongside on the mare they'd bought with the summer's earnings. The trail was rough, but familiar now, winding through forest and meadow, crossing creeks swollen with early snowmelt from the high peaks. Town was a collection of rough buildings clustered around a crossroads: general store, saloon, church, blacksmith, and a handful of houses. Small and unremarkable by most standards, but to Willow it might as well have been a grand city. Her eyes went wide at the sight of so many people, so many buildings, so much happening all at once. "Stay close," Mara instructed as they dismounted, "and remember your manners." They made their rounds together. First to the general store where Mara sold her butter and eggs, and Caleb traded for supplies: nails, lamp oil, flour, sugar, and a few precious books for Willow that made the girl's whole face light up. Then to the land agent's office, where Mara and Caleb signed the papers that made the homestead legally theirs together. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Bennett, Mr." Henderson said as he filed the deed. "A woman alone is vulnerable out here, legally speaking. This protects you both." As they left the land office, Caleb noticed a commotion near the saloon. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in argument. Mara stiffened beside him, her hand moving protectively to Willow's shoulder. "Maybe we should head back," she said quietly. But before they could move, the crowd parted, and Caleb found himself face to face with Theodore Ashford. The land speculator looked worse for wear than the last time they'd met, his fine clothes rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. "Well, well," Ashford said, his voice carrying across the street. "If it isn't the stubborn widow and her pet soldier." "We don't want trouble, Ashford." Caleb kept his voice level, aware of Willow pressed against Mara's side. "Of course you don't. You just want to squat on land you can't possibly develop, blocking progress for everyone else." Ashford's voice rose, playing to the crowd now. "The railroad's been confirmed. Did you know that? Coming through next year. And your little homestead sits right in the path of the best route. But instead of accepting fair compensation and moving on, you're holding out for more money like common." "Careful," Caleb said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Finish that sentence and we'll have a different kind of conversation." Ashford smiled, ugly and cold. "What are you going to do, soldier? Shoot me? In front of witnesses? In front of that little girl? I don't need to shoot you, but you need to step back and let us pass. Or what?" The tension stretched taut as a drawn bow. Caleb was acutely aware of the crowd watching, of Willow's frightened breathing, of Mara rigid beside him. He'd spent a year learning to be someone other than the cavalry soldier he'd been, learning to build instead of destroy. But that old training still lived in his bones, ready to surface when needed. "Ashford, let it go." A new voice cut through the tension, Jacob Miller, the old trapper, pushing through the crowd. "These folks have the law on their side and you know it. The railroad can route around their claim just as easy as through it. Stay out of this, old man. Can't do that. Daniel Bennett was my friend, and I won't stand by while you harass his widow." Miller's weathered hand rested on the pistol at his belt. "Now step aside before this gets uglier than it needs to be." For a moment, Caleb thought Ashford would push it, would force a confrontation that could only end badly. But the speculator looked around at the crowd, saw the lack of sympathy in their faces, and backed down with poor grace. "This isn't over," he said, directing the words at Mara. "The railroad will come through one way or another, and when it does, you'll regret being so stubborn." He stalked away, and the crowd dispersed, the entertainment over. Miller approached them with a kind smile for Willow. "You folks all right?" Thanks to you, Mara said, her voice shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. I thought for a moment, at least in public. Miller's expression turned serious. But you should watch yourselves out there. Railroad money makes men desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. They finished their business quickly after that and headed home as the sun began its descent. Willow had gone quiet, the excitement of town overshadowed by the confrontation she'd witnessed. Mara rode close enough that their stirrups nearly touched, and Caleb could see the tension in her shoulders. You think he'll try something? She asked when Willow had dozed off against Caleb's chest. I think men like Ashford don't give up easy, but we knew that already. Caleb adjusted his grip to keep Willow secure. The question is what we do about it. What can we do? We can't abandon our home every time someone threatens us. No, but we can be ready. Set watches again. Maybe ask Miller if he knows anyone looking for work who could help us through the winter. Safety in numbers. Mara was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of decision. Cross, if things get bad, I mean really bad, I want you to take Willow and go. Get her somewhere safe. Mara, promise me. I can't lose her too. She's all I have left of Daniel, all I have left of everything good in my life. If it comes down to the land or my daughter, the choice is easy. Caleb looked down at Willow's sleeping face, peaceful and trusting against his coat. The fierce protectiveness he felt surprised him with its intensity. When had this child become his to protect? When had this family become his family? It won't come to that, he said firmly. But if it does, I promise, I'll keep her safe no matter what. The promise seemed to settle something in Mara. They rode the rest of the way home in silence, each lost in thought, while the mountains darkened around them and the first stars emerged overhead. Winter arrived in earnest 2 weeks later with a storm that dumped 3 feet of snow and trapped them inside for 5 days. They passed the time with chores, with stories, with Willow's reading lessons, and the simple comfort of shared space. On the 3rd day, cabin fever drove them to clear a path to the barn just for something to do, and they had a snowball fight that left them all soaked and laughing. That night, after Willow had gone to bed, Caleb and Mara sat by the fire playing cards. They'd developed this ritual over the winter months, quiet evenings after the hard work was done. Just the two of them, talking or not, as the mood struck them. I've been thinking about what you said, Mara said, studying her cards, about Willow needing more than we can give her here. And you're right, but I don't know how to provide it without losing everything else. How do I give her education and opportunity without giving up this land, this life we've built? Caleb laid down his cards. What if we made enough money that we didn't have to choose? What if we turned this homestead into something bigger, something that could support sending Willow to school and still keep us here? How? We're already working as hard as we can. The railroad's coming, whether Ashford gets his way or not. That means people will come, workers, families, businesses. What if we were ready for that? What if we expanded our operation, started raising cattle seriously, maybe built a way station for travelers? Mara's eyes lit up with cautious interest. That would take capital we don't have. We have land. We could take out loans against it, use the money to build infrastructure before the railroad arrives. By the time the first trains run, we'd be positioned to provide services they need. That's a risk, a big one. So is staying small and hoping we can hold on through whatever comes. Caleb leaned forward. I'm not saying we have to decide tonight, but I'm saying we should think bigger than just survival. We should think about thriving. Mara studied him across the firelight, and Caleb saw the exact moment she shifted from defensive survivor to something else, someone ready to build instead of just defend. All right, she said slowly. We'll look into it. Come spring, we'll talk to the bank, see what's possible. But Cross, if we do this, we do it together. Equal partners in everything. Equal partners, he agreed. They shook on it, and Caleb felt the calloused strength in Mara's grip, felt the promise of the future they were building together. When she didn't immediately let go, he looked up to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He asked. I'm not afraid anymore, she said quietly. Of you leaving, I mean. I used to wake up expecting to find you gone, convinced that you'd realize this life wasn't worth the work. But you're still here. You've stayed through everything. I told you I would. I know, but there's a difference between promises and proof. You've given me proof, Cross. Day after day, month after month. You've shown me who you are through your actions, not just your words. The firelight caught the copper in her hair, painted her face in warm gold. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs, and he realized they were still holding hands, that Mara had moved closer without him noticing. Mara, he started, but she stopped him with a look. I'm still not ready, she said, but I'm getting there. For the first time since Daniel died, I can imagine a future that isn't just survival. I can imagine being happy again. She squeezed his hand. You did that, Caleb. You and Willow, you reminded me that grief doesn't have to be forever. I didn't do anything special. I just stayed. That's exactly what made it special. Mara smiled, soft and genuine. Anyone can make grand gestures, but staying, working, being present day after day, that's the real love, isn't it? The kind that builds something instead of just burning bright and fading. The word love hung between them, deliberate and weighted. Neither of them reached for it directly, but they both felt its presence, its possibility. Yeah, Caleb said, his voice rough. That's the real kind. They sat together until the fire burned low, hands linked, comfortable in the silence. When Mara finally stood to go to bed, she paused beside Caleb's chair and pressed a kiss to the top of his head. Brief, chaste, but deliberate. Good night, Caleb, she whispered. Good night, Mara. He sat alone after she'd gone, touching the place where her lips had brushed his hair, and felt something unlock in his chest. Hope, he realized. Pure, undiluted hope for a future he'd never dared imagine. The winter months passed in a blur of work and planning. Caleb sketched designs for expanded buildings, calculated costs, and researched cattle breeds that thrived in Montana winters. Mara worked the numbers, figuring out what they'd need to earn, what they could afford to borrow, what risks were acceptable. Willow helped both of them, her quick mind absorbing everything like a sponge. In February, a letter arrived from the bank in the territorial capital. They'd reviewed Caleb and Mara's application and were willing to extend a loan based on the land's increased value and the railroad's confirmed route. The amount was enough to make their expansion plans reality, if they were willing to bet everything on success. It's a lot of money, Mara said, staring at the letter. If we fail, we lose everything. And if we succeed, we build something that lasts, something we can pass down to Willow and her children. Caleb watched her carefully. But this is your decision, Mara. I'll support whatever you choose. She looked around the house they'd improved together, out the window at the land they'd defended, at Willow reading peacefully by the fire. Then she looked at Caleb, and he saw steel in her expression. Let's do it, she said. Let's build something that matters. They signed the papers in early March, and by the time the snow melted, workers were arriving to help with construction. The homestead transformed around them. A new barn twice the size of the old one, expanded corrals, a bunkhouse for hired hands, a smokehouse, and a chicken coop that could hold 50 birds. Caleb worked alongside the hired men, his cavalry training proving useful in managing labor and logistics. Mara handled the business side, negotiating prices, managing accounts, and making connections with merchants in town who'd need supplies once the railroad arrived. She proved to have a sharp mind for commerce, and Caleb watched with pride as she grew into the role of businesswoman as naturally as she'd worn the role of survivor. By late spring, they'd purchased their first cattle, 20 head of hardy stock that could handle the Montana weather. Caleb spent weeks riding the range with 2 hired cowboys, learning the rhythms of ranching, understanding the land in new ways. One evening in May, he returned to find Mara waiting on the porch, her expression troubled. "What's wrong?" he asked, dismounting quickly. Letter came, from Ashford's company. She handed him the envelope. They're making one final offer, triple what they offered before, plus a guarantee of employment once the railroad comes through. Caleb scanned the letter, noting the barely concealed threat underneath the generous terms. This is their last attempt before they try something else. I know. Mara's jaw set, and my answer's still no. Good. Caleb tucked the letter in his pocket. Then we make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. That night, he set watches again, armed the hired hands, and made it clear that the Bennett Cross Ranch was defended property. They'd built too much, risked too much, to let anyone take it from them now. The confrontation came on a warm June night when the air smelled of sage and possibility. Caleb was on watch when he spotted them. 6 riders approaching in the dark, moving with purpose toward the cattle herd. He didn't hesitate. 3 sharp whistles brought the hired hands running, and they positioned themselves between the riders and the livestock. When the riders realized they'd been spotted, they tried to scatter, but Caleb and his men cut them off. "That's far enough," Caleb called, his rifle aimed at the lead rider. "State your business or turn around." "We're here to move these cattle off disputed land," the man said, but his voice lacked conviction. "There's no dispute. This land is legally owned and registered. You're trespassing, and if you touch one animal, it's theft." The riders exchanged uncertain glances. These weren't hardened criminals, just men hired to do a job, probably promised easy money by Ashford's company. "Listen to me," Caleb said, his voice carrying command learned from years of leading men. "You ride away right now, and we forget this happened. You stay, and I defend my property with every legal right the territory grants me. Your choice." The lead rider hesitated, then cursed and turned his horse. The others followed, disappearing into the night without another word. Caleb watched them go, then turned to find Mara standing behind him with her rifle, Willow safe in the house, but surely watching from the window. "It's over," he said quietly. "For now." But Mara's expression held grim satisfaction. "They tried and failed. Word will spread. Maybe now Ashford's company will finally give up." She was right. In the following weeks, no more threats materialized. The railroad survey team arrived and confirmed their route would skirt the Bennett Cross property, not cross it. Ashford disappeared from the territory entirely, his company dissolved by investors tired of his failed schemes, and the homestead, now a ranch, thrived in ways none of them had dared imagine a year before. Standing together on the porch one evening in late June, watching the sun set over land they'd fought to keep and built to last, Caleb felt Mara's hand slip into his. "We did it," she said softly. "We actually did it." "We did," Caleb agreed. And when Mara turned to look at him, her eyes held something new, not just possibility anymore, but certainty. The future they'd been building piece by careful piece had become real, become solid, become theirs. Summer arrived with wildflowers carpeting the valley in colors so vivid they almost hurt to look at: purple lupine, yellow arnica, red paintbrush blazing against the green. Caleb stood in the doorway of the new barn, watching Willow chase butterflies through the meadow, her laughter carrying on the warm breeze, and felt something shift in his chest. 2 years ago, he'd been a dead man waiting for the earth to claim him. Now he had this: a ranch that prospered, a child who called him family even if not by blood, and a woman who'd somehow become the center of his world. "You're thinking too loud." He turned to find Mara approaching with 2 cups of lemonade, her hair caught up in a loose knot, wisps escaping to frame her face. She'd changed too over these months, the hard edges of grief softening into something gentler without losing any of her strength. She smiled more readily now, laughed at Willow's stories, touched Caleb's arm or shoulder with casual affection that spoke of trust earned through time. "Just counting my blessings," he said, accepting the lemonade. "Seems like the thing to do on a day this beautiful." "Well, count this among them. The railroad sent word. They want to contract with us for beef once the line's operational. 300 head annually at guaranteed prices." Mara's eyes sparkled with triumph. "We did it, Caleb. Everything we planned, everything we risked, it's paying off." He wanted to pull her into his arms, wanted to spin her around and kiss her breathless. But they still maintained those careful boundaries, still moved slowly despite the yearning that built between them like pressure before a storm. So instead, he just grinned and raised his cup. "To us, then. To building something that lasts." "To us," Mara echoed, and the way she looked at him made his pulse race. They stood drinking lemonade and watching Willow play, comfortable in shared silence, until the girl came running back with flushed cheeks and grass-stained knees. "Mama, Mr. Cross, can we have a party?" she asked breathlessly. "Mr. Miller's coming through next week with some other trappers, And Mrs. Henderson said the new school teacher arrived in town, and I thought maybe we could invite everyone to see the ranch." Mara and Caleb exchanged glances. They'd kept mostly to themselves these past months, focused on building rather than socializing. But Willow was right. They had something worth celebrating, something worth sharing. "I think that's a fine idea," Mara said. "A proper barn dance to christen the new building. What do you think, Caleb?" "I think I'm going to have to remember how to dance," he said, which made Willow giggle. They spent the next week preparing, Mara baking enough food to feed an army, Caleb and the hired hands cleaning and decorating the barn, Willow making garlands from wildflowers and practicing her best curtsy for greeting guests. The work felt joyful instead of burdensome, anticipation building with each passing day. The party arrived on a Saturday evening in late July. Neighbors came from miles around, ranch families, townspeople. The trappers Miller brought with him, even the new school teacher, a stern-looking woman named Miss Evelyn Carter, who softened considerably when Willow showed her the book she'd been reading. "This child has a remarkable mind," Miss Carter told Mara. "She should be in school, Mrs. Bennett. I'm starting classes in September, and I'd be honored to have her." Caleb watched Mara's face, saw the conflict there, pride warring with the fear of letting Willow go, even for something as important as education. "We'll discuss it," Mara said carefully. "The ranch is 15 miles from town. That's too far for daily travel." "She could board with me during the week, go home on weekends," Miss Carter suggested. "Several families are making similar arrangements. I have space in my quarters, and I'd charge only what it costs to feed her." Before Mara could respond, music started up. Someone had brought a fiddle, another a harmonica, and suddenly the barn filled with the lively strains of a reel. Couples moved to the makeshift dance floor, and the serious conversation dissolved into celebration. Caleb found himself swept into dancing with various partners, Mrs. Henderson, giggling girls from town, even old Mrs. Fletcher, who must have been 80 if she was a day. But his eyes kept finding Mara across the crowded barn, watching her laugh with the other women, watching her dance with Miller and the other men who lined up to partner with the beautiful widow who'd proven herself stronger than anyone expected. When the music shifted to something slower, Caleb finally worked up the courage to approach her. She stood near the refreshment table, fanning herself with her hand, cheeks flushed from dancing and the warm summer evening. "May I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Mara looked at him for a long moment, and Caleb saw awareness dawn in her eyes. This would be different from dancing with the others. This would be a public declaration of something they'd kept private, something they'd been circling for months. "Yes," she said quietly, and placed her hand in his. They moved to the center of the floor, and Caleb pulled her into the proper dance position, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. But there was nothing proper about the way his heart hammered, about the way she fit against him, about the heat that bloomed where their bodies touched. "People are watching," Mara murmured as they began to sway. "Let them watch. They'll talk. Let them talk." Caleb met her eyes. "I'm tired of pretending there's nothing between us, Mara. Tired of keeping distance when all I want is to close it." Her breath caught. Around them, other couples danced and laughed, but they might as well have been alone in the universe for all the attention Caleb paid them. "I'm scared," Mara admitted, "of wanting this too much, of losing someone else I love, of forgetting Daniel." "You won't forget him. He'll always be part of who you are, part of what made Willow." Caleb's hand tightened at her waist. "But Mara, you're allowed to be happy again. You're allowed to want more than just survival, and if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of that happiness." Tears gleamed in her eyes. "What if I'm not ready? What if I can't be what you need? You're already everything I need. You have been since the moment you saved my life, since the moment you let me stay, since the moment you trusted me with your daughter and your dreams." The music swelled around them, sweet and aching. "I love you, Mara Bennett. I've loved you for months, maybe from the very beginning, and I'll wait as long as it takes for you to love me back." A tear spilled down her cheek, catching the lamplight. "You foolish man," she whispered. "I already do. I think I have for a while now. I was just too afraid to say it." The world stopped. Everything Caleb had been, everything he'd done, every mistake and regret and moment of darkness. It all led to this, to Mara in his arms, to her confession hanging in the air between them like a promise. "Say it again," he said hoarsely. "I love you, Caleb Cross." Stronger now, more certain. "I love your patience and your strength. I love the way you make Willow laugh, and the way you never give up even when things get hard. I love that you stayed when leaving would have been easier. I love you." Caleb stopped dancing. Right there in the middle of the barn with everyone watching, he cupped Mara's face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Mara's arms came around his neck, and she kissed him back with a fierceness that spoke of 2 years of wanting, of grief finally loosening its grip, of choosing to live fully instead of just surviving. Someone whistled. Someone else cheered. The music stumbled to a halt as the musicians realized what was happening. When Caleb and Mara finally broke apart, breathless and smiling, they found themselves surrounded by grinning faces. "About damn time," Miller called out, raising his cup. "To Mara and Caleb! To Mara and Caleb!" the crowd echoed, and suddenly everyone was toasting them, clapping them on the back, offering congratulations and good-natured ribbing. Through it all, Caleb kept Mara's hand in his, anchoring himself to this moment, to this miracle. When he looked for Willow, he found her beaming at them from across the barn, her whole face alight with joy. The party lasted until well past midnight. When the last guests finally departed and the hired hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Caleb and Mara sat on the porch steps watching stars wheel overhead. Willow had long since been carried to bed, exhausted from dancing and excitement. "So what happens now?" Mara asked, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder. "I suppose that depends on what you want." "I want everything to stay exactly like this," she said, "but I also want more. I want to wake up next to you. I want to build a life together that's honest and open. I want Willow to have a father who loves her, not just a family friend." Caleb's throat went tight. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Mara pulled back to look at him directly. "Marry me, Caleb Cross. Make this partnership legal in every way. Be my husband, be Willow's father, be the man who stands beside me through whatever comes next." He should have expected this. Mara had never been one for waiting or playing coy. When she made a decision, she committed fully. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married 3 weeks later under the open sky with half the county in attendance. Willow stood as their witness, proud in a new dress Mara had sewn, her smile bright enough to rival the August sun. Jacob Miller gave Mara away, and Miss Carter cried into her handkerchief through the entire ceremony. The circuit preacher spoke words about love and commitment and building a life together, but Caleb barely heard them. He was too focused on Mara's face, on the joy written there, on the weight of the simple gold band he slipped onto her finger. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said finally. "You may kiss your bride." Caleb did, thoroughly, while the crowd cheered and threw wildflowers. When they broke apart, he saw Daniel's ghost standing just beyond the crowd, not threatening or sorrowful, but smiling, nodding once in approval before fading into the sunshine. Mara's first husband giving his blessing for her second chance at happiness. The celebration that followed put their barn dance to shame. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Musicians played until their fingers cramped, and children ran wild through the meadow, while adults danced and laughed and toasted the newlyweds. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Caleb pulled Mara into another dance. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again," she admitted. "You did that, Caleb. You came into my life when I'd given up on anything but survival, and you showed me there was more. Showed me I was allowed to want more." We showed each other. I was ready to die before Willow found me. You both saved my life in every way that matters. They swayed together as the music wrapped around them, and Caleb thought about the journey that brought them here. About a barefoot girl appearing from nowhere. About a woman who'd saved him despite every reason not to. About hard work and harder winters and slowly learning to trust again. About building something that mattered from the broken pieces of their past lives. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and Willow had been tucked into bed, Caleb and Mara stood in their bedroom, the room that had once been Mara's alone but now belonged to both of them. Mara's hands shook slightly as she reached for the buttons of her dress, and Caleb covered them with his own. "We don't have to rush anything," he said gently. "I want to, I'm just—" She laughed shakily. "It's been a long time. And you're not Daniel. This is new, and that feels like betraying him somehow." "You're not betraying anyone. You're choosing to live, to love again. That's not betrayal. That's courage." Caleb pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And I'm not trying to replace Daniel. I'm just trying to be Caleb, to love you as myself, not as a shadow of someone else." Mara nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "I know. And I love you as you are. All of you, including the scars and the past and the man you're still becoming." They came together slowly, gently, learning each other in the lamplight. And if Mara cried a little, Caleb understood it wasn't from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of letting go, of allowing herself to be vulnerable, of choosing joy after so much grief. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Mara traced the scar on Caleb's thigh, the one from the wound that had brought him to her door. "I used to curse this," she said quietly, "this injury that brought a cavalry soldier to my home. I saw it as one more piece of the military machine that took Daniel from me. And now? Now I see it as the thing that brought you to us. The thing that gave Willow someone to believe in and gave me a second chance I didn't know I needed." She pressed a kiss over the scar. Funny how perspective changes. Caleb pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, sage and wood smoke and something uniquely Mara. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for being exactly who you are." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time in years, Caleb didn't dream of dying. He dreamed instead of the future they'd build together, children running through the meadow, the ranch expanding and prospering, Willow growing into the brilliant woman she was meant to become. September arrived with cooler nights and the first hints of autumn color in the aspens. True to Miss Carter's word, the new school opened its doors, and after much discussion and a few tears, Mara and Caleb agreed to let Willow attend. She would board with Miss Carter during the week and come home on weekends, a compromise that gave her the education she deserved while keeping her connected to the ranch. The first Monday morning they delivered her to town, Willow clung to both of them with fierce hugs. "You'll come get me Friday?" she asked for the 10th time. "Every Friday without fail," Caleb promised, "and you'll tell us everything you learned." "I will, and I'll write letters too so you don't miss me too much." Mara smoothed Willow's hair, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We'll miss you terribly, sweet girl, but we're so proud of you. Learn everything you can, make friends, be brave. I'll make you proud, Mama. Both of you." They watched her walk into the schoolhouse, her small shoulders squared with determination, and Caleb felt Mara's hand find his. "She's growing up," Mara said, her voice thick. "She is, but she'll always be ours." The ride home felt emptier without Willow's chatter, but it also felt like a turning point. They were adapting, evolving, making room for growth while maintaining the foundation they'd built. It was hard, but it was right. That winter brought challenges, hard freezes and livestock losses, a broken well that needed replacing, an outbreak of illness among the hired hands. But Caleb and Mara faced everything together, their partnership strengthened by the vows they'd spoken and the love they'd chosen. And through it all, Willow thrived. She came home each weekend bursting with stories about her lessons, her new friends, the books Miss Carter was teaching from. She'd found her place in the world beyond their valley, but she never forgot where she came from or the family waiting for her. The years began to blur together in the way of good lives, seasons turning, the ranch expanding, challenges met and overcome. Caleb and Mara became known throughout the territory as shrewd ranchers, fair employers, and pillars of the growing community. When the railroad finally arrived, they were ready, their business relationships already established, their reputation solid. Willow turned 12, then 13, growing from a child into a young woman with Mara's strength and Daniel's kind heart, and something entirely her own, a fierce intelligence and compassion that made both her parents proud beyond words. She never stopped calling Caleb Mr. Cross in that teasing way she had, even though legally he'd become her father when he married Mara. One spring evening, as Willow prepared to return to school after a weekend home, she paused in the doorway. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, looking between Caleb and Mara. "Always," Mara said. "I remember that day I found Mr. Cross by the old trading post. I remember thinking he looked like a man who'd forgotten how to hope." Willow's eyes, so much older now than that 9-year-old girl's, held wisdom. "I'm glad I asked him to meet you, Mama. I'm glad he said yes. Because look at what we built together, all three of us. Look at what happened because one dying man chose to live." Caleb's throat went tight. He opened his arms, and Willow came to him, still young enough to want her father's embrace. "You saved my life, little bit," he said roughly. "You and your mama. Everything good I have, everything I've become. It started because you refused to believe anyone was beyond saving." "That's because no one is," Willow said simply. "We all deserve second chances. We all deserve to be seen for who we could become instead of who we've been." She pulled back, kissed both their cheeks, and headed out to where the wagon waited. Caleb and Mara stood on the porch watching her leave, hands linked as always. "She's right, you know," Mara said, "about second chances, about choosing to see the best in people. She learned that from you." "From us?" Mara turned to face him, and in the afternoon light she was exactly as beautiful as the first night they danced together. "We taught each other that, Caleb. You taught me that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. I taught you that being worthy isn't about your past, but about your choices now. Together we taught Willow that love is about showing up, about staying, about building something that lasts." 5 years after their wedding, on a warm June evening, Mara told Caleb she was pregnant. The news hit him like a physical blow, wonder and terror and joy all mixed together. "Are you happy?" Mara asked, watching his face carefully. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he managed. "Terrified might be closer, but yes, underneath the fear, I'm happier than I have words for." Their son was born the following February during a blizzard that reminded Caleb of the storm that had nearly killed him years before. But this time, instead of fighting through snow to survive, he paced the house while the midwife worked, Willow holding his hand and reassuring him that Mama would be fine. When he finally held his son, tiny and perfect and screaming, Caleb understood completely why Mara had been willing to risk everything to protect Willow. This fierce, overwhelming love, this bone-deep need to give this child everything good the world had to offer, it redefined what was possible. "What should we name him?" Mara asked from the bed, exhausted but glowing. They'd discussed names for months, debating between family names and new ones, unable to agree, but holding his son, feeling the weight of this new life they'd created, Caleb knew. "Thomas," he said quietly, "after my brother, the one I couldn't save." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas Cross. I love it. And Caleb, you honor him by building this life, by being the man he'd be proud to call brother. You saved yourself by learning to live again." Willow crowded close to peer at her new brother, her face full of wonder. "He's so small," she breathed. "Can I hold him?" Caleb carefully transferred the baby to her arms, guiding her hands, and watched his daughter, because that's what she was, legal papers or not, gaze at her brother with instant, absolute devotion. "I'll teach him everything," she promised. "How to read, how to ride, how to be brave. I'll be the best big sister ever." "You already are," Mara said softly. Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Clara, and the house rang with children's laughter again. Willow, nearly grown now and preparing to leave for university, doted on her siblings with the patience of someone who understood how precious family was. The night before Willow left for school, real school, in the territorial capital, where she'd study to become a teacher herself, the whole family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. Thomas drowsed in Mara's arms while Clara played at their feet, and Willow sat between Caleb and Mara, 18 years old and on the verge of her own adventure. "I'm scared," she admitted, "of leaving, of being on my own, of everything changing." "Change isn't always bad," Caleb said, thinking of the terrified man he'd been when she found him, the life he'd built since. "Sometimes change is how we become who we're meant to be." "You'll always have home to come back to," Mara added. No matter how far you go or how much you grow, this valley, this ranch, this family will always be here." Willow nodded, blinking back tears. "I know, and I'll make you proud. I'll take everything you taught me about strength and kindness and never giving up, and I'll use it to help other people the way you helped each other." "You already make us proud," Caleb said. "Every single day." They sat together as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple. The ranch spread out around them, buildings and corrals, cattle grazing in distant pastures, fields ready for planting. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, everything they'd chosen to create from the broken pieces of their pasts. Caleb looked at Mara and saw her watching him, love written plainly on her face. He looked at Willow, grown and capable and ready to make her mark on the world. He looked at Thomas and Clara, the future made flesh, proof that hope and hard work could create something beautiful. And he thought about that day 8 years ago when a barefoot girl appeared from nowhere and asked if he wanted to meet her mother. About the single word, yes, that had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Mara asked softly. "About how lucky I am," Caleb said simply. "About how I was ready to die, and instead I learned to live. About how the worst moment of my life led to the best ones." Mara squeezed his hand. "We saved each other, you know. You gave me a reason to hope again, and I gave you a reason to stay. Together we built something neither of us could have managed alone." "That's what love is, I think," Willow said, wise beyond her years. "Not one person saving another, but two people choosing to build something together. Choosing every day to stay, to work, to believe in what you're creating." She was right, Caleb realized. Love wasn't the grand gestures or the dramatic moments. It was the daily choice to show up, to work side by side, to face challenges together instead of alone. It was Mara checking the books each night while Caleb repaired harnesses. It was taking turns with the children, supporting Willow's dreams, defending their land, building their future one fence post at a time. That night, after the children were asleep and Willow had retired to pack the last of her things, Caleb and Mara stood in the yard looking up at the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Mara asked. "Saying yes that day? Staying here instead of moving on?" "Not once," Caleb said honestly. "This is where I was meant to be. You're who I was meant to find. And everything that happened before, all the pain and loss and mistakes, it was worth it because it led me here." I feel the same way. About Daniel's death, about the hard years alone, about all of it. If any of it had been different, we might not have found each other. Mara turned to face him, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. "You made me believe in happiness again, Caleb Cross. You gave me a partner and gave Willow a father and built this life with me when you could have walked away 100 times. That's the real miracle. Not that you stayed, but that you chose to keep choosing us every single day." Caleb pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. 8 years of marriage, 10 years since they met, and he still felt that same rush of gratitude every time she chose him back. "I love you," he said into her hair. "Today, tomorrow, for whatever time we have. I love you." "I love you too," Mara whispered. "My broken soldier, my second chance, my home." They stood together under the wheeling stars, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their past lives and built something beautiful from the ruins. Around them, the ranch settled into sleep, animals in the barn, children safe in their beds, the land itself resting before another day of work and growth. And Caleb understood finally and completely the truth that Willow had tried to teach him all those years ago. He hadn't been saved by strength or redemption or anything he'd done to earn it. He'd been saved by a little girl who refused to believe anyone was beyond saving, by a woman who chose mercy over bitterness, and by his own willingness to say yes when yes felt impossible. The storm that almost killed him had become the beginning of his life. The wound that festered had led him to healing. The man ready to die had learned instead to live, to love, to build something that would outlast him. Years later, when Thomas and Clara were grown with children of their own, when Willow had become a renowned educator who changed countless lives, when Caleb's hair had gone gray and Mara's hands were gnarled with age, they would sit on that same porch and tell their grandchildren the story. They would tell them about a soldier who'd lost his way, a widow who'd lost her husband, and a child wise enough to see that broken things could be mended if you were willing to try. They would tell them about hard work and harder winters, about defending what mattered, about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. But most of all, they would tell them about the power of one simple word, spoken at the right moment. Yes to love when grief felt safer. Yes to building instead of destroying. To staying instead of running. To becoming someone new instead of remaining someone broken. Yes to life in all its messy, beautiful, heartbreaking glory. And that, Caleb would tell his grandchildren, that single word spoken on a dusty frontier trail when he had nothing left to lose, was the best decision he'd ever made. Because sometimes salvation doesn't come from strength or virtue or deserving it. Sometimes it comes from a barefoot girl appearing from nowhere, offering a choice you didn't know you needed, and waiting patiently for you to find the courage to say yes. The rest, the love, the family, the life worth living, that was just what happened when you stopped running from your past and started building toward your future. That was the miracle. Not the saving, but the staying. Not the dramatic rescue, but the quiet choice made every morning to show up and try again. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.